6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
How about we do it again?
6, 7, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think I followed it.
Okay, let's try one more
I
time.
definitely
Ready?
I can move you. Making review. Making review.
Say 6,
6,
5,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, and welcome to one humdinger of an episode of Rank and Review. That's right, guest. G Money is going to be here to talk to your host and random Canadian, Larry Parsons, about 6 classic horror movies. That's right, the Universal monsters are going to have their day in court. We're going to swing these crypt doors wide open, I tell you, and we want to hear what you have to say about it. You can send your feedback to ranknreview@gmail.com. That's ranknreview@gmail.com. I don't know why I went all Western there at the end. Anyway, I hope you're up for a little bit of a different episode because G and I are a little bit out of our comfort zone for this particular episode. So we're talking about classic, vintage creature features from the Universal stack. So I hope you guys enjoy that. And as usual, we're going to be discussing spoilers for the movies, and we're going to have some coarse language. But come on, we're all grown-ups here, aren't we? Please tell your friends about Rank and Review. Do check out the Shelf Shedding Movie podcast hosted by friend of the show, Jason Dubray. Check out the Terror Table podcast and check out Cobwebs, a Gothic horror podcast. There are other podcasts than Rank and Review, believe it or not. I mean, Rank and Review may be the best of them, but I mean, there are other ones to listen to. I hope you enjoy this episode of Rank and Review. I have Gareth in my basement.
Hey.
And it's been a while since you've been on Rank and Review, but to be fair, you've been busy.
It's true.
You helped me you made this movie with me. I don't even help me. You made this movie, Book of Trespasses, with me. And I just want to say, for the record on the podcast, how eternally grateful I will forever be for everything you did for me.
Well,
a dream came true, and it has a lot to do with you. So I'm sorry to suck your dick on the podcast like
Yes,
this,
please.
but thank you for being here. Episode 14
Yeah.
was the last time you were here, and it's now episode 161.
we did it, though.
We
got there.
And we're going to talk about some classic horror movies.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a while since we had a discussion. I think you picked it. Was there a reason you wanted to do classic, Universal horror?
Honestly, I needed the history lesson. That's what I felt like. All these classic monsters that are so prevalent everywhere now. And I didn't know anything about the originals. Not a damn thing. And that seemed criminal. I can't really talk about movies now if I don't know where they came from. So.
Well, and you made a horror movie, and because of me being, in orbit of your life, I feel like I've slowly beat you down. Like, you didn't used to be a horror guy, and now you're doing your horror due diligence homework.
That's right.
And I respect that.
Well,
I think you'll find it's tough to talk about some of these older movies, because
of course it is.
Well, obviously they're not at all contemporary to us. I think we go from the 30s to the late 50s.
That's right, yeah.
And, that's 20 years and change before I was on the planet. And they were still figuring a lot of filmmaking techniques out. And
which was special to watch, actually. That was kind of nice.
But I do find these old movies have this layer of separation. You do have to kind of meet them halfway. I used to not understand how anybody could find these movies frightening, to be honest. When I saw them at a younger age, they just seemed so over the top, and there's something obvious is the word that comes to mind about it. Like, yeah, of course, that's what Dracula is supposed to look like, and that's what the Gillman's supposed to look like, and there's this big orchestral score that's going to drown out everything, and there's sort of over the top projected stage acting in a film environment,
Oh, wow, yes.
and the sort of uneasy figuring things out.
Mm-hmm.
But do I think they deserve to be called classic movies? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
would hope so.
There's a reason that people still give a shit about these movies. There's a reason that
Absolutely.
they're trying to reinvent them. They've been called the Marvel Cinematic Universe of their time, and that does kind of make sense. They each had their own sequel series, and they had crossover events. And
They did.
Abbott and Costello meet the Wolfman,
yes,
and
indeed.
et cetera, et cetera. It was big business, and as much as we might find it a little bit campy and snarky a little bit, or we interpret it that way, no, I think that for the most part, these were genuinely attempts to thrill the audience.
Absolutely.
Complete with a newsreel and a cartoon.
Well, you needed a little bit of fun before you start, but I think one of the other things that I noticed is just watching them figure out how to make movies throughout the progression of the ones that we've watched. It's remarkable what they learned in such a short amount of time, and how a different director's take, particularly in those early days, made such a massive difference as to how it was seen on screen. I think too often in the early days it was probably a director of stage actors that was behind the camera, and
Yeah.
it's just a completely different medium, and they learned that along the way, obviously. But
Well, and you see that in Dracula, the first movie we talk about. There's scenes that just feel like a filmed, steady shot
Absolutely.
of a play.
yes,
And by the time we get to Creature of the Black Lagoon, we're into full-on cinema.
absolutely. Underwater photography and just the amount of camera moves that they have, the number of cuts between scenes, it's shocking how much different it is from the first movie, Dracula.
Yeah.
It's just stunning to see, but also great to have learned about along the way.
So, yeah, I'm not going to be able to fill in the background and trivia with a lot of the supporting players and stuff like that we're going to be talking about in these movies. I like to think I'm a little bit learned, at least about the modern era of horror and fantastic movies. Like, I know my shit, usually.
I think that's fair to say.
This episode, G and I are going to feel it out a little bit. And I think that's still going to be worthwhile for everybody.
Absolutely.
But I'm just being honest. I'm not a scholar when it comes to basically, the further away you get from 1976 or before 1976, the less I know about movies. I tended to pay more attention to movies while I was alive.
Well, shame on you. But
Is there anything else you want to say by way of introduction before we start this thing?
I just want to jump in.
Okay. Well, the 6 classic Universal monster movies we're going to review are Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy, The Invisible Man, The Wolfman, and The Creature from the Black Lagoon. Let's do it.
Classic monsters.
I am Dracula. A moment ago, I stumbled upon a most amazing phenomenon. Something so incredible, I mistrust my own judgment. Look.
Dracula. The very mention of the name brings to mind things so evil, so fantastic, so degrading. You wonder if it isn't all a dream, a nightmare.
Rats. Rats. Thousands. Millions of them.
But no, this is no dream. This is Dracula, the original terrifying story of a maniac and a man who lived after death, lived on human blood, took the form of a vampire bat, and lured innocent girls to a fate truly worse than death.
Dracula? Oh, what's he done to you, dear? Tell me.
He came to me. He opened a thing in his arm, and he made me drink.
Dracula, 1931. Directed by Todd Browning and one other, Carl Friend, uncredited co-director here, but there it is. As I said, before, with these movies, I can't really quote you chapter and verse on a lot of what they did next or where their career trajectory were, because a lot of these movies we're going to talk about were made 40 years before you and I were born.
Exactly.
So it's interesting looking at Dracula in 2019 and, sort of trying to give it a fair shake.
It's true.
The first big takeaways was, like, I'm continually gobsmacked with the sets.
Indeed. They're beautiful.
In a lot of these Universal monsters, you're right in that they recycle a lot of them, but these huge two-story sets or these vast spaces that they put their actors in and then using it really well, I thought that really, really worked for me. Dracula himself, Bela Lugosi himself, didn't really work for me, and that seems like an important part of Dracula to work for me. But, I mean, I didn't mind watching. It's 75 minutes. It's it wasn't a bitter pill. I've had a lot harder watches for Rank and Review. But, yeah, it's pretty scare-free, and I did more chortling than I did,
Of course.
appreciate.
And I think that's to be expected when you consider 1931.
Yeah, exactly. So is that us just looking at it from that perspective, or has just time been unkind?
Well, I think it's just us from that perspective, for sure. I think as far as time being unkind, well, nothing's going to age well when it's 80 years old.
Right.
It's just not. It's not going to hold up to today's standards by any imagining. But, and I can't disagree with you, Bela Lugosi was maybe not great, but he also didn't have a lot to work with. He was a suspense-based character. There was a lot of silence and a lot of just still shots of him being scary.
Hitting beam of lights on his eyes.
Absolutely, and loitering on that shot far too long.
Putting people in their trances and whatnot.
Exactly.
But we did talk a lot about Dwight Fry, who plays Renfield in
Yes,
this movie.
'cause he was
He's not
tremendous.
that interesting for the first 15 or so minutes when he's sane, but after the sequence on the boat, which was again a very impressive piece of production,
Truly was.
when they find him in the hull of the boat, the lone survivor, utterly mad.
He's gone quite mad.
And all of the business with him being committed. Anytime he was on screen, I was enjoying myself. Like, I think he easily gave the best performance of the movie.
Oh, absolutely. But he had the most to do.
Yeah.
And maybe that's unfair to the rest of the cast, but they didn't have a lot to do. They were in pretty static situations for the most part. His character was allowed to change so drastically and in such a fun way. I like that maybe at the time it was quite off-putting to watch, but I admittedly just found it fun.
Right.
And funny to watch. It was great.
It's interesting how this was one of these pre-branded movies in a lot of ways. Nosferatu had been made, of course. There'd been other whacks at it, but they didn't have the rights to do actually Dracula. And as much as in this case they had the rights to do Dracula and they had a product that had a built-in audience, so to speak, it was they had their hands tied because Dracula's themes are sex and violence, and they couldn't implicitly address
either
the sex and the violence.
Precisely.
So, I guess I would say it's a good whack at Dracula sans sex and violence, but is that what we want?
No, but it was one of the few pieces that had source material at the time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there couldn't have been too many novels that were being optioned for movies in the 30s, so they at least had something to go from that wasn't just a screenplay, that wasn't just a song and dance number, and that's probably made it different enough that audiences would enjoy it for that fact alone.
There's the softest whisper of it with Lucy and Mina and their, wanting to not be told what to do or who their chosen suitor should be and what's more appropriate, and that whole dynamic of the boy that you're supposed to be with and the bad boy that you're attracted to, and even though the bad boy's worse for you, that's the one that is the most interesting and alluring, seductive. And again, that would work if I thought that Bela Lugosi was at all seductive, but he's pretty transparently evil in all of his moves. There's nothing cunning about anything that he does particularly. He's in your face a bad guy, and it's not so much a seduction as he drinks her blood, forces her to drink his blood, puts her under a trance, puts her under a spell, and yeah.
It's interesting because I didn't think of it until now, but even when Van Helsing discovers that he's Nosferatu, I mean, he hints at it from the first scene that he's on screen.
Yeah.
But as soon as it's proven in fact, and he just sort of shrugs his shoulders and leaves the room. Well, now you know.
Yeah.
See ya.
I have no reflection. Deal with it.
And off he goes. Huh. All right.
I'll be back to do more evil in a little while, but I'm just going to let this plot point sink in.
And they make all their preparations at that point. Yes. Wonderful.
I can feel like, imagine myself like, you know, what a proper gloves off Dracula movie. I guess the closest that we've had is the Francis Ford Coppola, which was at least full throttle bloody and full throttle sexual, whatever you want to say, flaws or to pluses or minuses to the rest of it.
Sure.
And you definitely see the influence. It is a classic creature feature. I mean, what are you going to do? Yeah, there's a really weird bat that hangs on strings and flaps, and like a big special effect moment involves him walking through cobwebs, and the wow moments are not very wow.
No, it was basic filmmaking, wasn't it? Like,
but I still found I've always loved the sequence in almost any iteration of Dracula, with the fucked up carriage ride up to the castle and all the strange goings on around it, and the driver that won't respond to any of your commands. In this case, it's clearly Dracula who drives him drives him there, then changes his clothes. It's like he doesn't want to know that he doesn't have any actual servants. We talked about the silence of the movie,
which I loved. Yes.
A lot of the times when you're watching these old Universal movies, as I remembered them, they're wall-to-wall sound, and that's not certainly the case with Dracula.
No, it was silent the entire time, with the exception of the opening song and closing song for credits.
Yeah.
And I think that just lent to the suspense nature of it. I understand where Hitchcock got the idea to use nothing, right? Because there is something really wonderful about that, especially in the big spaces you were describing too. When you can feel the silence in a giant room like that, it is much more unsettling as an audience member.
It commands respect somehow. Silence commands respect. It almost says, hey, pay attention. Can't hear anything, but you better listen because you might hear something, right? And it's a sort of like, again, a fairly modern feeling sort of technique.
Yep.
And 1931, not particularly modern movie. It's a film school. I mean, what are you gonna do? It's weird. Like, we're watching all these ghosts in front of the camera, all these people in front and behind the camera. Like they're not around anymore to defend the work, and we're way out of context. I can imagine how at that time this would be a really frightening movie to people. I think that the Renfield character's sort of off-the-hook craziness is there. Some people really got off on Bela Lugosi. I wasn't one of them. I liked that the sort of Mina subplot of the novel is left abandoned.
Yes.
We're told about this lady in white that's walking the countryside feeding on children, and then it's never mentioned again for the rest of the movie. So it's like this, not sutured up, nice and clean at the end. I mean, I don't know what more I can say about it. I don't have a lot of background in Dracula, so it's not a real chore to watch it. Again, originally this is something that people would watch. It would have a newsreel and a cartoon in front of it. Yep. People would come dress up, and this would be their whole night. And it was like a status social thing that you'd seen. This is an immortal movie in its own way. I mean, I think that. It's only going to continue to look and feel its age, but there'll still be guys like us that will find excuses to watch and talk about it.
Absolutely, and I'm glad of that. I enjoyed watching it front to back. It was a fun watch, and it really, as much as it had its creaks and groans, you have to expect that, and it didn't bother me as much as I thought it might. And it was fun. The fact that there was so much fear and suspense, according to the audience at the time, that they needed a comic relief, I found kind of interesting as well.
The guy who's supposed to be looking after Renfield is constantly escaping his room. Martin? Was it Martin? I can't remember his name. Anyway, they kept on cutting to this old fart who was not that great at his job, just to give the audience a break from all this, like, nerve-shredding fucking tension that's going on wall to wall.
Well, clearly they needed it at the time, or they felt they did.
It's funny. It's not a successful adaptation of Bram Stoker's novel at all, and it doesn't really fairly represent a lot of the proper themes of like vampire movies that would move forward even fairly shortly after this. Certainly into the Hammer Studios version of Dracula, and when the 70s version of Dracula with Badham shows up, it's we're on.
Yep.
We're on.
Yeah.
This is the Dracula movie you can watch with grandma. This is the Dracula movie that you can take home with the kids. This is horror homework, but it goes down easy.
It does.
Good enough?
Fair enough.
Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's
When this dead hand moves, the monster created by a man they called Mad is turned loose to strike terror into the hearts of men. To shock women into uncontrolled hysteria.
Elizabeth!
To prey upon the innocence of children. This is the story you've heard about, talked about. The spine-tingling, blood-chilling story that stuns your emotions. Frankenstein.
Don't touch that!
So also in 1931, Frankenstein came out.
We're assuming later that same year.
I'm going to correct the credit that they gave. It was written by Mary Shelley. Her credit in the film is Mrs. Percy Shelley, based on a novel by Mrs. Percy
B. Shelley. Yeah.
Wow. Much like Dracula, we're looking at an adaptation that is incredibly loose. This time I think it was less about the thematic difficulties of the book, because they did frankly address some child murder, which was controversial at the time.
Indeed.
But less with the hard lessons at the end of the book and the tragic trajectory of it, because I think that they knew that this was going to be a property that they were going to be branching off of. They were going to do Bride of Frankenstein. They were going to the universal monster thing was becoming real.
Yes.
Right away.
Yep.
So necessarily they took large leaps away from the book. But I think on a production level, as much as I said nice things about Dracula, even though it's just later in the same year, maybe it's just the James Whale as a director,
Yep.
Technically it's just clearly a better made movie.
Yep.
On almost every level
Yes.
than Dracula.
100%.
That also makes it easier to watch. It's a familiar story that they mostly stay true to, at least thematically, and so I found it generally an easier watch than I did Dracula. I was able to get lost in it more than I was Dracula. I was snickering at it a lot less than Dracula.
True.
But again, I can't lie to anyone. It's still 1931, and it still comes with all of that.
Yes.
Sort of very formal performances, and we're dealing with types, and we're dealing with, a different era for suspense. What's going to be scaring the audience then is not what's going to scare this. The insidious crowd is going to sit with arms folded, right?
Yes.
But yes, of course, Boris Karloff is, iconic as the creature, and it's a story that is retold again and again and shall be retold again and again. So it's one of those classic horror movies. What do you say about it? It's Frankenstein. It's good.
I enjoyed it very much. And I think, unlike Dracula, I found the very stage-style performances in Dracula hard to watch at times, with the exception of a couple of asides directly to the camera by the Frankenstein, who played him, Clive? Something?
Sorry. Colin Clive
Colin
played
Clive.
Henry Frankenstein in this original story.
So with the exception of a couple of asides directly into the camera, I felt the stage acting a lot less.
Right.
And that was really nice. And absolutely the movement that the camera suddenly started making compared to Dracula made it a much more engaging film. The fact that they could go from room to room all in a single shot was instantly more immersive, more engaging as an audience
Clearly
member.
more cinematic.
Oh.
It was not a filmed play. This was a movie.
It
and
was.
right away we noticed that difference.
Mhm.
The one thing I would push back on as far as the theatrical performance, Frederick Kerr, who plays Baron Frankenstein, was giving me like, what's the dude from fucking Gilligan's Island, the rich Hawthorne, whatever guy, right? It's like this, like that sort of snooty British aristocratic archetype.
Yeah.
Red nose.
Complete with monocle, yeah.
Yeah, and like sort of comic relief, but not.
Mm.
I don't know exactly what he's contributing. He's a much bigger character here than as I remember him being in the books.
Mm-hmm.
But his performance is of that old school, very stagey, familiar.
It's true.
Most everyone else is giving kind of, I guess, modern-ish performances.
I thought so, yeah.
There's still some of them playing for the back of the room, but it's not that sort of operatic, theatrical war paint approach.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sometimes I wonder, after watching it now, if partly that was due to the fact that the camera was able to move and actually push in on the actors a little bit. They maybe didn't have to feel like they were in such a big room anymore,
Right.
because the camera was right in their face, so they could be smaller in their performance instead of grandiose, which was nice.
Yeah, and they're better at the big shots and the inserts, or at least at cutting them into it.
Oh,
There's
wow.
that memorable moment where they do the close-up and he hugs the coffin and says, "Soon, my pet," or whatever it
Yes,
is.
exactly.
And then they cut back to the wide, and it doesn't seem like a connected moment at all.
No.
But sometimes it works when the creature and he confront each other within the gears of that huge windmill, and we sort of see them looking at each other through the spinning
wheel.
That was, that's nice.
It's a very cool shot,
Yeah.
and very inventive, and something you wouldn't have seen prior to that, I assume.
Yeah. Yeah. Moving through the sets with the cameras, not cutting to the next room, but like we passed through the walls a couple of times.
Yep.
And then I think that takes some of the theatricality for the actors because they don't have just their lines to hit. They have to meet the camera in certain places. There's a technical aspect that again is making it more cinematic visually and getting the actors' heads out of the live performance.
Absolutely. It makes for a less gimmicky performance for everybody, which is great.
I love the lead performance of Frankenstein, especially when his creature first comes alive. How he's so happy and so crazy simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
That Renfield actor returns here.
Comes back as Fritz.
Fritz, the Igor figure. It's funny when I studied Frankenstein a couple times. I did it in high school and in university. I ended up studying it, and I remember my teacher talking to me saying that he would still occasionally get papers that would reference Igor.
Mm-hmm.
There's no Igor in the book.
Yes.
Read the book, dude. You're in university. But I found it surprising that he's not even named Igor in the movie. So if they're basing it off of this movie, then they didn't even wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Anyway, that was an aside. So the creature, obviously an important component to a monster movie.
Indeed.
Where are we landing on this?
Well, a tough creature to play, I think. And I suppose Boris Karloff was brave enough to take on the role, and good for him. But that was going to be an uphill battle the whole way.
The academic approach to the novel is that we are to feel sympathy for this creature.
Yes.
Would you say that's accomplished?
I think early in the movie they do a fine job of it. As the movie wears on, it becomes more difficult because they lose. I don't know. They maybe lose the arc of the tragedy to some degree, and that's unfortunate.
Well, I've
When they first show the monster and he's reaching for the sunlight while sitting in the dungeon laboratory, it's very, you feel very sad.
and he gets beaten with chains and poked at with a torch, which he obviously doesn't seem to care for particularly.
Indeed.
He's not much loved. He's shown the stick much more than the carrot.
Oh, most
I get all of this sympathetic approach. Like I said, I studied it twice, and I've always been a little bit resistant to that. I mean, you're sympathetic up to a point.
Yes.
A lot of villains have tragic, backgrounds. You can get behind their motivations, but they can still be villains. But for me, once like Elizabeth gets killed in the book, and like a young relative of Victor Frankenstein gets strangled, and this little girl famously in the pond. Once innocents start getting killed,
Absolutely.
then my sympathy sort of fades away. And it's interesting that, again, they didn't really pick an angle. He's going to be a famous, universal monster. They're going to base a lot of other movies around him. So he's got to be scary. But we have to want to see more of him.
Right.
So, again, I don't think they really made a choice, and that's actually better for me than the constant, hitting in the head of man is a bigger monster than this creature,
Yes.
blah blah blah. These,
Yeah, no, and that they were dubious about it made sense for the future that they were planning.
and the hubris of course, of defying God and defeating death. They hit that note really hard for like the first third of the movie, and then it's gone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I feel like the first third, even half of the movie addresses those important themes of the book more directly, and then they realized perhaps that they had a future with this character and needed to maybe backpedal a little bit off of those things.
Again, they let him kill that little girl. And at the time, that was controversial. That whole exchange between the creature and the girl, for some reason, that people thought that was crossing a line. Maybe it's just how long that shot goes. The father carrying this corpse into town. Like, the camera's just on him
Incredible
forever.
tracking shot, yes.
It's on him forever, and it's like,
Yeah, certainly watching somebody carry a dead body through a crowd of celebrating people is an unsettling thing to watch, and it works very well.
Convincingly ignites the mob.
Absolutely. It does.
And then, of course, we lead to the incredibly famous climactic sequence with the huge windmill set and
beautiful
and model, and the fire and the debris. I think this was like a pyrotechnic light show, very complicated, a lot of extras, a lot of live fire, a lot of
Yeah, no. It was an ambitious sort of sequence.
Again, it's not like the rest of the movie was full of like makeshift sets. It's interesting how like the deeper we get into this, we're going to see things getting a little bit more obviously inexpensive in a lot of ways. These feel like lavish productions in a lot of ways.
The sets do a lot for that. Yeah.
Again, through that 31 filter.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
The CGI is not great. So largely I think much more successful. Makes me, curious moving forward. We have The Mummy, we have The Invisible Man, we have like some of these ones, to compare to the Marvel Universe, there's ups and downs. What's next? Do we have Thor the Dark World, or do we have the Avengers? To be continued.
I suppose.
Death, eternal punishment for anyone who opens this casket.
The mummy. Is it dead or alive? Human or inhuman? You'll know. You'll see. You'll feel the awful, creeping, crawling terror that stands your hair on end and brings a scream to your lips. There's nothing on earth like the mummy.
You will not remember what I show you now, and yet I shall awaken memories of love and crime and death.
Now I know his horrible plan. He is going to kill her and make her a living mummy like himself.
The Mummy from 1932, directed by Karl Freund and starring Boris Karloff as the reincarnated mummy of Imhotep. Some archaeologists find a mummy, they read a forbidden scroll, bring the mummy back to life, and the mummy goes about trying to romance a woman he believes to be the reincarnation of his previous wife.
Yes.
And that actress, Zita Johann, is my favorite actress we've encountered so far. I think she's got real
Wink.
moxie.
Very well.
She's got a winky sort of Betty Boop quality that
She
I was
does,
appreciating.
very much.
My experience of The Mummy is that it started really strong and then very kind of quickly, precipitously headed off of the edge of a cliff.
It's true.
I did like the setup. I like the original first look we get of the mummy when he looks like a emaciated corpse and like all dried and gross and dusty.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not how he spends most of the movie.
No, indeed.
He spends most of the movie as
The reincarnation of this prince, yeah.
Boris Karloff, and
Yes.
he's a very obviously bad dude doing very obviously bad things.
Yes.
And I think you said very correctly after we watched it that it's a pretty sloppy combination of Frankenstein and Dracula.
Yes, indeed.
So far, yeah, I guess I would have to say it's my least favorite of the ones that we watched so far. Did I hate watching it? I guess I wouldn't say that I hated watching it, but, you know, it's having no real literary basis with which to launch off of, and not a lot of meat to choose story-wise, and having a lot of the stuff being familiar.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of just felt kind of laid there a little bit. But
Well,
I'm happy to hear a second opinion.
No, I can't disagree with most of what you're saying there. I mean, based on basically historical myth from Egypt, I mean, if that's your source material, you can only do so much, but it really did lay the groundwork for every mummy movie to come after it. So I guess I'll give them that. I felt like Boris Karloff's performance, though, is like, after seeing him in Frankenstein as well, is maybe the performances are too similar for me to really appreciate what a great actor he's known to be.
Yeah. There's loose superstition that inspired this.
Okay.
Of bad luck that has befallen certain archaeologists that opened certain tombs, particularly the ones that hadn't been pre-plundered.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there's no text, there's no real story here.
That's
and
right.
Imhotep's motivations are obvious because they tell us in that sort of very flat way. They're not trying to be sneaky about everything.
No.
And he at times seems super overpowered in his ability to like look into a pool of water and force people to have heart attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And then other times he seems like comically underpowered.
Yes. When he has to run and hide from museum staff.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Right. Yeah. No, it's... I suppose poking holes in the story is a bit easy for this one, just because it has nothing to work from. And that's one of the things that it maybe lacked, and that on top of being a combination for me, as you said, of Frankenstein and Dracula. It's just, yeah.
It seems the more modern take we get on all of these creature features, the better they have at playing the sympathetic note. I think, again, like, if we felt a little bit torn about the motivations of Imhotep, or like maybe we had reason to believe that he was right, this woman was the reincarnation, she does seem compelled to him. But again, I just fall back on it was a repeat of the trance thing. The Dracula was putting people into trances, so this guy's putting people in trances.
And that's where it pulled mostly from Dracula, too, was all the close-up shots of his eyes, the movement of his hand as he is possessing these people from far away. It's there's just a deliberateness to it, and it's kind of boring to watch, maybe.
And call me petty, but I wanted more Mummy in my Mummy movie. Like, we got Mummy for the first few scenes, and I gotta like that first archaeologist guy who reads the scroll and then sees the mummy wake up and leave the room, and he just starts laughing.
Goes mad.
And then we're told that he died laughing in a mental institution sometime later.
Yep.
Like, I like that. I think that the groundwork there for a scary movie was good, and
Absolutely.
I don't know. It's like if they made him a true monster that sort of lurked in the dark and you know, stumbled into the room and ate people, who could like that. Or if they went, you know, oh, he's misunderstood. He just wants to be loved. He's waited lifetimes to essentially buried alive to find this love in his life. Let's feel bad for him. But they didn't really do that.
No.
He's just neither.
That's right. He's just a miserable prick who exists.
Yeah.
Quite in your face the entire time. And there's nothing redeeming about him. And so it's hard to feel sorry for him at all. Yeah, the character is just kind of a dick.
Yeah. And again, it's another one of these
And
characters.
the reveal, too. Same thing, right?
Yeah.
The reveal is very upfront, almost rude.
Yeah.
And then leaves the room very abruptly. Fuck you.
There's some uncomfortable bits of business. Shocking violence, I think, for the time. We see a guy stabbed through with a spear.
That's pretty cool.
But some of the language and the treatment of the black people in the film, the Nubians with their, quote, ancient blood being more easy for him to manipulate,
yeah.
it's a little bit uncomfortable. I could, like, it's a very old movie, and it is of a different time, and I understand. Like,
well, and you have to take that with a grain of salt to some degree, because movies 20 years ago wouldn't be made today, let alone 80.
Yeah.
So
it's true. And again, by today's standards, it's hardly like gratuitous necessarily. Well, the racism is gratuitous, but the violence isn't within, But it was surprising because it's clearly the most violent thing that we've seen so far in any of the movies. And there it was. Not that the movies of this era weren't, okay with violence. If you've ever seen the original cut of, King Kong with him stepping on people and like the rather grisly dinosaur deaths that are depicted in it.
Yes.
It's weird days because they don't really have a rating system that makes any kind of sense.
It's true.
And some of the movies seem to be really reserved in their violence, and some of them seem to let it fly. And I still love, this is a thing I love about these old movies, whenever they do a fall and they have like the Raggedy Ann doll dummies that drop. Every time that makes me smile. It doesn't convince me of anything, but it makes me smile every single time.
I love that they're figuring it out, this whole world of filmmaking. It's kind of fascinating. But once again, in The Mummy, I felt like the filmmaking was maybe lacking a little bit. Once again, the camera became completely like it was looking through a window. It became a two-dimensional scenario. There was very little use of the space in terms of adding the camera to it, and it was much more claustrophobic than the other movies that we've seen thus far too, which had big opulent spaces to take place.
We're missing our big room scenes.
We're missing all the big rooms. Now I understand most of it takes place in crypts, but nonetheless, it would have been nice to get some space in the room occasionally.
Yeah, and again, I'm a story guy. There's this one guy who has a magical amulet which is supposed to protect him from the mummy's powers.
For sure.
Nobody else has that amulet anywhere in the movie. So presumably, couldn't the mummy just be given heart attacks left, right, and center here? And, just the basic motivations of our main character are highly suspect.
Well, they're just completely selfish, right?
Yeah.
Of somebody who thought he ruled the world at one point. So.
And we go back to the Dracula thing where this woman is compelled to be in his presence. She can't resist his charms.
Once again.
But much like the Dracula when I talked about, I don't see, there's no heat in that relationship. I don't see why she would be compelled to him unless it was some sort of magical evil spell that she was put under.
Yeah.
And again, it would have more power if if it was, or again, they could play that card where it was real sort of physical desire versus,
Right.
Again, the man she's supposed to be with against the man she wants to be with.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know, I guess overall for me, The Mummy is like a combination of Dracula and Frankenstein, and definitely worse than both of those parts.
Yeah, that's a pretty fair assessment. And looking at this now, I understand, I'm sure a lot of people poo-poo our sort of negative approach to it, but compared to the other movies, it's bad. I don't think, it's badly put together, and for in a movie of its time, I think it's, quote, fine. But I also understand, I'm watching it, how when they remade it in the 90s, that they decided to make it a goofy Indiana Jones in spirit kind of adventure, and it was repurposed as a Tom Cruise action movie recently, but, there's not a lot there to remake.
No.
So I guess I understand. I understand both why it's respected, but I understand why it's certainly not in the same breath or category as Frankenstein or Dracula.
Yeah.
It's another interesting curio. I mean, if you're this curious about it, sure, give it a watch. But
well, it's another monster movie from the time, so why not look at it? Oh, and what was I going to say? Right, I've completely forgotten.
I know the Universal Monsters bites the dust.
It'll come back to me later.
Once I press stop on the recorder.
That'll be when.
Yeah. You wanted to give props?
I wanted to give props to the special effect that we saw, which is the first one that we've sort of seen in the series of movies now where they did the overlay of film as the skull and sort of flesh came through the bandages. It was just...
When the mummy is being destroyed because the scroll is being destroyed, he rapidly ages into dust, and for the time, a pretty amazing feat of special effects.
Well, certainly noteworthy.
Yeah.
Because it will come up again.
Bandages right up to the top of his head, all round his ears.
Flora's worried about Griffin.
I had a terrible feeling last night. I felt he was in desperate trouble.
He meddled in things men should leave alone. Not the slightest clue. That's where the clues are. He wasn't leaving anything to chance.
There must be a way back. God knows there's a way back.
I need help!
If only you just leave me alone.
It's the stranger with the goggles. He's gone mad.
You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you? All right, I'll show you. Let me in your madness when you're peering through the keyholes and gaping through the curtains. And now you'll suffer for it.
But why? Why do it, Griffin? Just a scientific experiment at first, to do something no other men in the world had done. Suddenly I realized the power I held, the power to rule, to make the world grovel at my feet.
You know who the Invisible Man is, Doctor. Where is Dr. Griffin? What's the good of concealing it?
Oh, come and stay with us. Let's fight this thing out together.
Police, quickly. The Invisible Man is in my house.
He's mad. He's killed a man tonight.
Believe me, as surely as the moon will set and the sun will rise, I shall kill you tomorrow night. The secret of invisibility lies there in my books. Don't you see what it means? Power. Power to walk into the gold vaults of the nations, into the secrets of kings, into the Holy of Holies.
All right, moving on to 1933, again with director James Whale, same man who brought us Frankenstein, the special effects extravaganza that is The Invisible Man, based off of the H.G. Wells novel. And again, I think we're seeing the benefit of having a story, a source material to base off of it. Really high concept, good pure sci-fi, but a good melding of horror as well.
Yep.
I think that I enjoy the special effects. I enjoy the story. I think that the flaw here, and I'd have to go back to the original text to see if it's from the text or just the idea of condensing it into 70 minutes or whatever, is that we don't get to know our protagonist before he's already become invisible and insane.
That's right.
And I think that a lot of the heft of the drama or the excitement or the care, we'd feel more for him if we felt this decline. But basically we meet him, he's already invisible, he's already insane, he's a full-on monster.
Yes.
To me, though, that is kind of the flaw of the movie. I mean, again, looking through the window of 1933, the special effects are great, the characterizations are fun and lively. I like everybody at that small town inn that we meet.
Yes, indeed.
They're simultaneously hilarious, but sort of credible, reacting to an incredible situation.
Yep.
Where the love interest doesn't work again because we didn't see the love established.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah. But I do like that we established with this villain, and he, declares he will do evil deeds, and he does indeed do some evil deeds.
Absolutely.
He makes a promise he's going to murder somebody at 10 o'clock the next day, and he murders somebody at 10 o'clock the next day. He tips over a baby carriage. He derails a fucking train. The carnage count in this movie is
incredibly
through
high,
the ceiling compared to everything else we've seen.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think it would probably be the most lauded and remembered piece of special effects of its era, if not for a little movie called King Kong, coming out in a similar time frame, which is basically entirely one large elaborate special effect. But I mean, this is special effect. Not that Kong isn't, but this is more of sort of a razor point on using the special effects to help tell the story. We originally meet the Invisible Man, and he's all wrapped in bandages, and we can't wait to see him. And they give us some early winks and some early peeks, and eventually,
we get our reveal.
We get our full-on, quote, Invisible Man.
Yes, indeed.
Great stuff. And again, an enemy who isn't there. The man who is not there. So I had a lot of fun with this one.
Yep.
So that's where I start.
All right. Once again, this one seems so much more dynamic to me. James Whale, I think, is a big reason for that. But all of the moving camera, all of the, like, noticeably putting a camera on dollies and on jibs and getting much more dynamic coverage of the entire story, which it just engrosses me as a viewer so much more easily. It's unfortunate that we start, perhaps, with our protagonist too late. To have any sympathy for him. It's unfortunate because he's already just an egomaniacal sociopath, and that's unfortunate. Like, it would have been nice to get to know him a little earlier when he was a softer man, when he had more of a relationship with the love interest.
I have more sympathy with the dude he kills, this guy who clearly was interested in his girlfriend. We get an idea of that, is earnestly, at least first, trying to help this guy until he becomes like a live-in hostage with him.
That's right.
But I understood his motivation and sort of felt the bind that he was in, and then felt his terror at knowing this invisible man was out to get him, and that, you know, if an invisible man wants to kill you, you're probably going to die. And he wasn't villain enough to, quote, deserve his fate. Right. But, I mean, between that death and the death of the Invisible Man himself, I felt more for this guy.
Most definitely. Well, partly because his death is told to him in detail right before it happens, which is a fucking horrible thing to encounter in any time. But this poor bastard sitting in the car being told this car is going to roll down a hill after I push it, it's going to go through a fence, then it's going to have a 100-meter drop into the bottom of a canyon and hit a boulder and explode.
Enjoy that.
So have fun. Push.
And off he goes.
And holy shit.
Psychological horror on top of the physical, visceral horror.
Indeed. And, but once again, you know, these scientists up to their damned experiments.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about these monster movies back in the day, but...
Man should not have tread there.
No.
Two of the actresses that I want to mention. Gloria Stewart, interestingly, plays Flora. She's had a late in her career resurgence by being in Titanic. That's kind of an interesting note. She doesn't have a lot to do in the movie, really.
No.
But I don't think she sucks.
And
it's just
older
kind of,
Rose,
yeah, interesting. But I think the real sort of... if I was handing out awards for this actress Una O'Connor, who plays Jenny Hall, the woman who's running the boarding house with her, I guess not husband, but boyfriend or whatever. She kind of reminds me of the old servant who looks after Scrooge in the Alistair Sim version of Scrooge.
Yes, just the hysterical screaming.
Yeah, the low status sort of Cockney accent and her just screaming at any given situation.
Absolutely.
And like the short leash that she's got her boy on. You're gonna do this, or there's gonna be hell to pay. And then when her boy gets hurt, she just completely fucking flips out.
Absolutely. I love that she becomes completely hysterical. It's oddly enough, it's an appropriate reaction to some degree. It's way over the top, but it's at least fun. I don't know.
And you were talking about when we watched it, this is the first time we've seen anything like a montage or like these quick cuts.
When they're putting the word out over the radio that there's an invisible man on the loose, and we're cutting to all these farmhouses, other pubs, you know, all these different locations to show how the word is actually getting out via radio.
People nailing the doors shut and walking. And,
it's not a play on film anymore. It's actually turning into a movie.
Yeah. And then it gets you sort of thinking, like, how would you go about catching an invisible man? And there's hilarious things like the police linking arms and encircling a property and just walking in and hoping not to bump into anybody. I also think, I mean, I get what he's going for with the woohoo, crazy, but it would have been nice if the madness was a little bit more motivated. Like, like again, right away, well, I'm going to be an evil person, and we're going to start killing people. Some famous people, some not so famous people.
Just to show there's no favoritism.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
It's a high concept. Again, it feels like a science fiction movie. Like, a lot of people consider, I guess, Alien to be the first and purest sci-fi horror. But, I mean, The Fly and this Invisible Man thing, this H.G. Wells sort of dealt in this as well. I do think, and it's interesting because, like, the more easy special effects for the film was when he's completely invisible, when they just have manipulating the set and the environment, which, again, everybody 100% believed. Like, there is your invisible man. I like that your special effect is literally nothing.
Nothing. It's an unspecial effect.
And the cheapest stuff is what really kind of I found the most charming in this. In modern versions on the Invisible Man, like Memoirs of Invisible Man or Hollow Man, very expensive, tough special effects. So instead of talking about what you think the Invisible Man would look like in the rain, we get to see it. But I still think there's some showstoppers. His dancing around in his shirt is famous. The lighting of the cigarette.
Yes. That was a great effect. It looked awesome.
And I totally get, like, at the time, people would be, like, going back to see it again or telling their friends, no, you gotta check out The Invisible Man. That shit's crazy.
Yep.
They must have had an Invisible Man on set. I am personally convinced. But for my horror fans who listen to Rank and Review, out of the movies we've watched so far, this one, it definitely felt the most like a horror movie. Absolutely. There's not much to redeem in this character. Like, when he goes down and falls, we see a lump fall into the snowdrift. And there's a hilarious business about him having a doctor tell us exactly where he's been shot. Like, they could somehow perform some exploratory surgery or something. We feel nothing for him, and I feel like the movie wants us to feel something. It's like there's scenes missing, right? But like I said at the start of the review, that's as close as I can come to wagging a finger. That's my flaw in the movie. And if you're bloodthirsty, this is the best on the list so far. I think maybe I still might give the edge to Frankenstein, but we're not around to ranking them yet. But it's interesting. Now we're going to be moving forward, like a significant chunk of time. And in some ways the production values improve, and in some way they kind of shrink. It's sort of, I don't know if it's franchise fatigue or if it's new management or what. But
emphasis being put on different things for the contemporary audience that it was, right?
But no, I had fun with The Invisible Man.
Yeah, very much. It was a delight.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before I press this button? He's gone invisible.
Jenny Williams was killed?
Yes. Find something?
Animal tracks.
Whoever is bitten by a werewolf and lives becomes a werewolf himself.
Oh, don't hand me that. You're just wasting your time.
The wolf bit you, didn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, he did. You wouldn't want to run away with a murderer, would you?
Oh, Larry, you're not. You know you're not.
I killed Bela. I killed Richardson. If I stay here any longer, you can't tell who'll be next.
I like this classic idea of the Wolfman that we all have is bullshit. This whole, like, the lore of the Wolfman and how there's been stories of the Wolfman throughout history.
Yes.
Well, there's been stories of people that change into animals, and animals that affect, when they bite people, give them affectations of animals. But this movie is interesting, and so is the next one we're going to review, in that it's not based on any source material. This is a complete invention. It's a complete invention. And you'd think... I mean, I guess as an English major, I would be suspicious of that. Without this rich material behind it, are they still going to be able to make something of value? And since we're still talking about the Wolfman in 2020, I'm going to go ahead and say that yes, they did.
I think they managed. Yeah.
So, yeah, the whole idea of somebody who, the lunar cycle affecting their change. There's a little bit more about the gypsy and the sort of the mark of the beast sort of on them, and this poem that we get recited over and over and over again in the movie. But we've stepped a little bit forward in time, and the performances are starting to feel a lot more comfortable and a lot more modern, especially our lead, the Lon Chaney Jr.
Yes, indeed.
He's just seems like a normal guy when he shows up. There's nothing sort of stiff or wooden about him. And his dad, Claude Rains, he is a little bit, the stiff English gentleman, but it's appropriate for the character.
Quite right.
It doesn't take me out of it. And despite our main character, Lawrence Talbot, Larry, who's a guy named Larry who we like and sympathize with, a very rare thing in movies, we like him despite the fact that his approach to kind of romancing this girl is more than a little bit creepy by today's standards. He spies on her through a window, then he goes into the shop and he starts talking to her all creepy about the stuff he's learned by spying on her, and this is all supposed to be super charming.
Well, yeah.
But it's charming still, but just not in the way that it intended to be charming. It's just sort of like it's off cue in a way that it's sort of amusing. But the tragedy works in this because we like the character.
Yes.
So, yes, overall, I feel The Wolfman was a worthy use of my time. Again, it's another tight, 75, 80, if that, minutes.
Yeah.
It gets the job done quickly. And, I liked The Wolfman for the most part.
I have to agree with you. I really enjoyed The Wolfman. I thought the amount of story that they were able to manufacture from, I'm assuming it was based on some of these myths of people changing into animals, but they manufactured a really, really solid story and managed to create some canon along the way that has been used since, right? Which is remarkable and deserves a nod at the very least. I liked the Lon Chaney character. I'm not sure if I liked the Lon Chaney Jr. just as an actor, but I appreciated why he was cast and why he was appropriate for the role. It helps that he's a pretty hulking fellow as well, particularly when the changes happen, and makes the violence seem a little bit more necessary that happens against him. So, and even when he's fighting off the wolf in the forest in the opening scenes, it's believable enough that he could actually fight one of these beasts off.
Yeah, especially with his
getting away with
silver,
only a bite.
Silver staff.
Oh, right, yes, the silver-tipped
wolf
cane
that
he
uses to beat the wolf. And the original werewolf, it just looks like a wolf that he defends this woman from this woman, and he takes his bite. And that's the sort of thing about a werewolf bite, as established by this movie. I mean, if you get bitten by a werewolf, you're fucked. The solution is death, or you become this monster and you kill people.
That's right.
And I think this is a different thing from a lot of the horror. I mean, not that we haven't had somewhat sympathetic takes on these other guys. This guy doesn't want to hurt anyone. He's desperately,
that's
just wants to be a normal guy and have this romance and live his life and be a happy, well-meaning fellow.
Indeed.
And his life gets thrown off of a cliff by this.
Indeed.
Through no fault of his own, but in fact, through a heroic effort of his own.
That's
It
right.
is a classic horror movie thing. No good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here it is. At the time it came out, these slow dissolve fades that we do over his sitting still body to slowly morph him into the Wolfman. Again, I think that was a lot more impressive when you're watching it in the theater in the day. But it does establish, I think, that you can do stuff in the shadows. You can sort of work around it. There's where the human footsteps start, and then all of a sudden the footprints turn into wolves.
Right.
Good stuff like that. But sooner or later you have to show the beast, and not only that, for a werewolf movie, sooner or later you have to show us a transformation. This is just a Hollywood rule. Nobody's done it better since the American Werewolf in London, I don't think. But you just have to do it, and I like watching it as thinking like, some kid watched this when it was on the big screen, and it blew his fucking mind.
Absolutely. Well, it was a revolutionary technique, even just to lay film over itself so you could create that transformation right before your eyes. It was unheard of. I mean, as you say, usually they would pass by a tree in the foreground or some obvious place where you could make a cut and make that change. So
Yeah.
to see it actually happen on screen before your eyes in 1942 or whenever this came out, remarkable. Absolutely remarkable.
It's 41 according to Wikipedia, but close enough.
Oh, shame on me. I'm already failing at my history lesson, apparently. But, yeah, the amount of camera tricks that they were able to use, and then the astonishing work done by the makeup artist.
Yeah.
Just beyond what was even expected at that time, I would think. And I was glad to hear that throughout the years he got his kudos despite being unceremoniously dismissed from Universal after not growing with the times, because how dare you invent something and then not grow with it?
But I'm good at doing it my way.
Well, and shame on him, I guess.
Well, but to his credit, the picture, even to this day, even in the day and age of like the Benicio del Toro Wolfman,
yes,
when people, I think of the Wolfman, this is the image that they still have, still today.
It's basically the dog-faced boy.
Yeah. And that is interesting, like with all the amazing effects and like the hellhound approach that Werewolf in London took. That still, it's the two-legged standing clawed werewolf that we seem to have that seems to have made the most impact culturally. I really liked in the original movie how it was a good relationship between the father and son. I think one of the things that bothered me about the remake is that in the remake, Anthony Hopkins plays his dad, Benicio's dad, and he ends up being basically the main adversary of the film. And it took the heart out of it. It took kind of the tragedy out of the movie a little bit. The idea that you have to kill your son to save him from this curse is actually, I think, pretty devastating.
I would think, yes.
And so after a point, the movie, I think, after the point of that bite, the movie could shift to become about that father character. What do you do when somebody you love is, changing for the worse, and there's no way out of it. It set up more dramatic stakes than we saw in any previous movie, and that we're going to see in any other movie that we talk about.
Yes. Yes, well, it's that human element to the creature once again, right? Anytime you're, I mean, even with Frankenstein, you're bringing somebody back from the dead. With somebody like the same with the Mummy, and Dracula's all to himself. But the Wolfman is man, first and foremost, and I think that's maybe why we appreciate that hybrid image to this day, because it is the best hybrid between them. American Werewolf London is amazing, but it's more wolf than man anymore, right? And once it takes that sort of there's a point to which both species are married well, and then once it goes too far in either direction, it just doesn't seem to work anymore. So it makes sense that this is the image that sticks in everyone's mind.
We know what a man is, we know what a wolf is. We'll let you know the werewolf is somewhere in between.
Yes.
No, I feel you. I feel you. Yeah, I really like the gypsy culture in the movie. Bela Lugosi shows up to give this prophetic warning to our first victim, and it's kind of campy. He's really big and over the top in the way that we love Bela Lugosi to be, but I like this whole it's not a real sort of authentic portrayal of gypsies. I don't know if there's ever been an authentic quote portrayal of gypsies. It's all this idea we have of this caravan of like ancient psychic withered old ladies just cause
scarves,
wreak havoc wherever they go, and like it hasn't changed a beat. You go from this movie to the gypsy culture that's shown in Sam Raimi's Drag Me to Hell, and they have not aged a day. It's the exact same sort of thing. I don't know if this movie established that as well, but I still feel its influence. And for a movie that came out in 1941, bravo.
No small feat. Yeah, no, they did a very fine job indeed.
Is there anything else you want to say about Wolfman? I feel like we've done short drift on it, but I don't know what more to say. It speaks for itself in a lot of ways.
It really does. I mean,
it was an easier watch than some of the other ones. I didn't feel it was as much of a hill to get over. I felt more access to the movie than I did some of the other ones.
Well, and the just film had developed so much already by this point in history as well. Like the amount of moving camera was much more noticeable. The sets and the locations that they used just seemed much more encompassing of the audience, and that's huge. That makes a big difference, I think, when you're telling a story on screen. If you can make your audience feel like they're there with you, the time is gonna go by that a little bit quicker, right? So,
win.
Science couldn't explain it, but there it was, alive in the deep, deep waters of the Amazon. A throwback to a creature that had existed 100 million years ago, immensely strong and destructive. A woman's beauty, the bait that brought it out of its lair. See underwater thrills never photographed before. See titanic underwater battles never dreamed of before in this most terrifying of the science fiction adventures.
I'm pretty sure the first time, maybe there was a few establishing shots in the other one. The Creature from the Black Lagoon seems to have been shot largely on location.
Yes.
And right away, that sort of ups the kind of production experience when you're watching the movie. You see actual alligators. You see real footage of the Amazon where the story's set.
Right.
Now, I'm sure there was definitely a set for the boat and a set for the lagoon and a very controlled environment for the underwater swimming. But
of course,
the fact that we get all of this establishing, especially in the first third of the movie, of these real locations, it gives as much, quote, reality establishing this fantastic story as we've seen in any of the other movies so far. And that's to its credit. Also, once again, the fact that it's a completely original work for film. There's no blueprint for us. We don't know what's going to happen, and we have this idea in our heads what the Dracula story is going to be, what the Frankenstein story is. Even the Wolfman, I think you kind of understand the trajectory of the movie, even if you haven't seen it before.
It's true. Yeah.
This one about this scientific expedition in the Amazon that finds a really interesting claw that is perched out of this rock like a tree branch.
Yes.
When I originally saw this film, it was in 3D projected at the museum in Regina, and I don't know if it was a different version or if it's just my memory of it. I remember it being a lot more cheesy than it was watching it this time. It felt much more like they were playing it to be a straight thriller than... I remember the audience laughing a lot at all of the cheesy 3D angles, and I didn't notice it. We didn't watch it in 3D, although we did watch it projected. It actually is a legit monster movie the way we would understand a monster movie to be today. So we have a group of characters that we get to know. They go someplace they shouldn't. They start getting picked off one by one. Their means of escape is blocked. There's obstacles to overcome.
Yeah.
All of that is absolutely there. And what's new, or I think was new at the time, is not only do we get this really cool, crazy Gillman suit with the famous sort of puffers under his cheeks to make him look like he's sucking air, but the suit was designed to function underwater, and we have all of this gorgeous, gorgeous underwater cinematography.
Unbelievable.
And really good sparing views of the creature. I mean, the first few times we see it, it's just a claw coming out of the water, and it's sort of like hilarious. The music sting, it happens again and again and again to tell us the creature's there, and it's almost, if he had eyes on his hand, I guess that would make sense, but he just keeps on letting the audience know that he's nearby.
That's right.
But the movie is better than any of these movies that we've seen before at, revealing the creature slowly. Even the first time we see a full good shot of the creature, it's super quick.
Yep.
It's super quick. And, by the time we get to the third act, we're going to see the creature big and large, and that's what you paid your money for. And it delivers on that, effect. The acting sort of goes up and down. Some of it's a little bit more wooden than others, but it does feel like a more modern adventure sort of romp.
It does.
And watching it with you, because we just watched it yesterday, I'm sort of mystified that like every one of these other movies has been reinterpreted several times, and The Mummy just took a big old crap. That Tom Cruise movie, right?
Yeah.
Why haven't we seen more from this property, especially in the modern era? Where's our Gillman movie? I mean, I guess The Shape of Water, but that's a different thing, right?
Entirely. Yeah.
And the Gillman's like a supporting character in the Harry Potter, but I don't know. This creature's interesting. I think that it kind of deserves a modern take. Not that there's anything particularly wrong with this original one, but since everything else has been so richly reinterpreted, why is no one taking a whack at the Creature from the Black Lagoon?
It's a curious thought, yeah.
And it's a turnaround for me, because when I originally saw the movie, I thought maybe it should be like a Tim Burton type of remake, where they don't change the script at all and lean into the cheese.
Yeah.
Sort of treat it like the 60s era Batman.
Sure.
But watching it this time, I say no. I said remake it and try and make this scary. I think it could really work.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I mean, it ticks the boxes for me as a horror movie fan. I don't know if it's reinventing the wheel, but at this point the wheel was early enough that the map wasn't as clear. And I largely like the cast. I think we both agreed our favorite was Nestor Palva as Captain Lucas.
Yes, indeed.
The guy this is his ugly old tugboat delivering them to and from the lagoon.
Right. The tugboat called Rita.
Yeah, and he's got a big shit-eating grin on his face all the time, whether it's called for or not. But somehow it's charming. It's somehow, even when it's inappropriate, it's charming. So that was my opening salvo on The Creature from the Black Lagoon. Once again, I liked it more than I kind of thought I would revisiting it.
Well, this was my first time seeing it too, so for me it was unexpected and really quite delightful. It's a good question as to why they haven't tried to remake it, other than that we've since discovered so much more about the ocean. There's plenty of real monsters down there that they can focus on, so maybe why do an imaginary one? But I'm thinking, of course, of Jaws and other sharks movies. But I really, really enjoyed all of the sequence where they're actually going down the Amazon, finding this little tributary that takes them into the Black Lagoon, and their curiosity about maybe these fossils washed up down there. We have to go and investigate. And it's it just seemed plausible enough that this is the route they would take. They didn't just end up there.
They made a point
out of the blue,
painstakingly explaining who everybody was, why they were going where they were going, in a way that seems almost like they were almost condescending, like they're explaining it to a school child. Like it's maybe a little bit awkward in how it's presented, but they didn't just want to be a dumb movie. I think that in this time and age, they were establishing, quote, the reality of this scientific expedition.
That's right.
And this one guy who, is sympathetic to the creature and doesn't think they should kill it, and the other guy,
the ichthyologist,
the other guy's just firing a harpoon at it as soon as he sees it. And
he's the money guy.
Yeah,
so.
It's interesting to try and think about the motivations of the creature. On one hand, you think, well, they are fucking with it. They came to its territory and started shooting harpoons at it. But on the other hand, it just randomly shows up and kills people. Yes. So I don't really fully understand. Like, it stalks the woman as she's doing her carefree swim in an Amazon lagoon, which just, you couldn't pay me any money to do that. But I didn't get this, like, King Kong thing where he fell in love with her. It was almost more like he was curious about it. Like, as much as they've never seen him, he's never seen anything like them before.
True enough.
But yeah, the first couple guys he kills for no reason at all. Because they're there. And everything else seems to be reactionary, but again, classic monster movie template. And like you were talking about, if it was an alligator or a shark, it would still be playing the role of the monster. It would have motivations. It would get angry if you heard it. It would make it. It would become Jaws. It's personal.
Yes, right.
This time it's personal. And I think that there was an opportunity to show more dimension to the creature, but the creature itself was so cool. I think that it was just enough of a spectacle at the time, especially. Mm-hmm. It was just such a mind-blowing thing that it was enough just to see the Gill Man.
Absolutely. The suit that they mocked up was incredible. It was so good. For 54, and just shocking how much work they must have put into it. But it makes me wonder if, the production value on this is so much higher, I wonder how much higher the production budget was.
Right.
Just to do all of the underwater photography at all in 54. I mean, they certainly didn't have the equipment that we have now to do it. And it would have cost a small fortune, I would think.
We looked at
particularly in those controlled environments.
For sure. We looked at the equipment that the characters were using in the movie, and we were wondering how different the actual equipment they were using to shoot it must have been. Probably not very.
Not very. Right? I wouldn't think.
And there's some thoughtful, I guess, by the monster movie conventions. There's, like I say, the guy who wants to study the creature and the guy who wants to instantly exploit it, and it's the discovery of the ages. There's even if they have to leave and come back, they found this creature, it's their find, and for some reason this guy is just like, no one will believe us unless we bring its head back with us, right? Yeah. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it was still doing more than most monster movies of its time, as far as being about something,
right?
Because we're about to enter the age where monster movies kind of fall out of favor, and it goes all into like flying saucers and the threat from outer space and being outmatched scientifically by your adversary. It's sort of and the ills of man. We've done something we shouldn't, and now giant ants are coming to eat us. then you can see, it's all about us. Our hubris is revisiting us in the shape of these monsters. But I don't know that was as common in 57. I could be wrong about that, but...
No. Yeah, admittedly, I don't know enough about the cinema of 54 to comment accurately on that. But
the movie works well enough for the characters, so when the asshole guy dies, I'm happy that he dies, but it's still a tragic moment in the movie. And he just limp body sort of surfaces face down in the lagoon. It's like, by 54 or whatever, kind of a devastating moment.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. Sorry, I just was thinking that it is interesting that we want to root for the monster more than anyone else.
Well, we've been trained to by the other monster movies, too.
It's true.
And he takes a licking and keeps on ticking. He takes 2 or 3 harpoon hits.
Yep.
He's gassed and chemicaled several times, and then he's shot like 5 or 6 times at the end before our hero mercifully says, "No, that's enough."
Yes, exactly. That was the line. Oh, I got there. But and I mean, he obviously slinks back into the Amazon basin at that point. Who knows what happens to him after that? But
I got a Jaws vibe of him sort of slowly sinking into the depths. The shark sort of, once it's been exploded, is slowly descending into the ocean and disappears. But again, no part of you would believe, when you're in the theaters watching The Creature from the Black Lagoon, there's going to be more Black Lagoon, and you can't freaking wait. But when I was a kid, my only real experience with them was in the Monster Squad.
Yes.
The Gillman in the Monster Squad.
Holy crap.
I have affection for that movie. It hasn't aged particularly well, but it has a strong place in my heart.
Well, yeah.
I think this might be the most accessible of the 6 movies that we watched for the modern day.
Yes, well, I mean, it's the most modern of the movies that we've reviewed as well.
Well, and I feel like my list might reflect that a little bit.
It's going to be hard not to.
But, I mean, I did enjoy revisiting all these movies. I really did enjoy this one. And once again, I have, yay, rank and review. I've revisited a movie and completely had a completely different change. It's been happening more and more lately, where I go to review a movie that I kind of figure I know how I feel about it, and then I watch it again, and this is one of the perfect form monster movies. The way people will say that Halloween is the perfect form slasher movie, it's the slasher movie that you should compare all other slasher movies to. In the way the creature behaves, in the setup and execution of the story, The Creature from the Black Lagoon is the template for a monster movie. And sometimes I would say that in a way of wagging my finger at a movie. But in this case, respect. All right, that is 6 Universal Classic Creature Features reviewed. Gareth Nickel, thank you so much for being here, brother. I do appreciate you. I hate to always bully you about the podcast, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, dear.
We've got to give a shout out to Anita.
All right.
Hi, Anita.
Hey, buddy.
Thanks for doing my podcast. Once upon a time. So here we sit. As we said at the start of this, it's a weird bunch of movies to rank because they're so removed from where we are. Here we are, a couple of modern 2020 dudes, and like these movies weren't made in our time, for our time.
No.
So I guess take it with a grain of salt. But I would, even the least of these movies, I wouldn't ever tell anyone not to watch them.
No, I
It's
would
like
encourage everyone to watch them.
If you're a little bit,
fan.
if you're a little bit curious about it, do it. They go down really easy. They're quick, you know.
Yep. No, I've seen longer episodes of HBO television. So
yeah. I don't know if it's about me getting older, but I find I have a lot more patience for a lot of these retro horror movies, too.
Oh, it's definitely you getting older.
Yeah, probably. But, like, when I was a kid, I'm like, this isn't scary, this is old and lame.
Yes.
And there are elements of this isn't scary, this is old and lame, but largely I had fun. Gee, what was your least favorite of these 6 movies, and why?
Okay, well, coming in dead last was The Mummy.
What?
Yes. There was a lot wrong with it. It was the same director from Dracula, and it meant that after there was a progression from Dracula to Frankenstein where the camera was moving and we saw a little bit more violence and it was a little more interesting to watch, The Mummy almost took a step backwards from that. And because it was an invented story that was poorly invented. Unfortunately, it just it didn't get me from the beginning. It was just kind of a mess, top to bottom. So it's at the bottom of my list.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's your number 5?
All right, in number 5, I against what I wanted to, but Dracula was number 5. Once again, it's mostly because it is the oldest of the films that we've watched, and it was very much a plow movie. A lot of these beautiful sets, big open spaces, and they didn't use them at all other than set up a camera as far away as they could and then film the action that was taking place. And when you've only got 2 characters in a ballroom, it's not very exciting to watch from 40 yards away.
Right.
So it struggled that way. Even though it had source material, it just didn't quite work for me, I guess, on screen. And I guess with Mummy in number 6 and Dracula number 5, I guess I'm not exactly giving Bela Lugosi the biggest shout out. But sorry, buddy.
Throwing some shade on Bela Lugosi.
I guess. Who knew? I didn't realize, but
risk taker.
He was a wonderful gypsy though in Wolfman. Yeah. So it just suffers from being the eldest, I think. But hey, they struck out and made a movie in 31, so that's something.
It was huge at the time. I mean, again, I do think that the problem is, you're right. It's a filmed play in a lot of places.
It is. So in number 4, I put The Invisible Man. Reason being, they had some incredible source material to work from and left out the front half of that source material, which meant we had no sympathy for the Invisible Man because he basically came in a rage. You didn't see him develop into that rage because of this illness that he had.
He was barking mad from scene 1.
From scene 1, moment 1, and unfortunately, as we've pointed out already, you want to have sympathy for these monsters, and it's hard to have sympathy for a monster if they're evil from the get-go.
And as I remember, this is
nothing redeeming about this guy. This is, he knocks over flower vendors and pushes kids off bicycles. Yeah. It's kind of ridiculous. He's just an evil person.
And as I remember,
without
this is something that he did to himself. I mean, it was still a tragedy, but it wasn't something necessarily inflicted upon him.
No, it was self-inflicted.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, he was just too much of an asshole right from moment 1. So... that's why that one is there. Number 3, Frankenstein. I enjoyed Frankenstein very much. It was, once again, I think, after seeing Dracula first, watching this one next, you started to see those camera moves. You had a ton of sympathy for this poor character that was resurrected from the dead. That's a bad way to come back into being. And...
not a great parental figure.
Not as such. And yeah, the poor monster was definitely just a character you could sympathize with. It was well done, and I thought they did very well with the source material on that one. Putting it on screen, which was not easy to do on the heels of Dracula, and they did a much better job with it. Different director from Dracula and The Mummy as well, and I think that was a big thing too. Just a more dynamically filmed movie, and that makes a huge difference, particularly watching it now. Maybe at the time it would have been even higher on my list, but yeah, it comes in number 3. Number 2, I had The Wolfman. Original story and original lore that has stuck with us all the way through to present day. Very impressive. I thought largely the acting was really good. It was a lot less stagey, and they accomplished it very well. It was a nice blend of they said this too, but between the modern world and the aging world, sort of brought together in its very own atmosphere, and it made it really accessible for the audience because you didn't necessarily relate it to one place or time, and that was helpful, I think, for a story like this one. Which, of course, leaves number 1 to be The Creature of the Black Lagoon. Once again, they invented a brilliant story, I thought, and it was just so well executed. The shots were, at times, beautiful, considering it's a black and white movie from 1954. Yeah. Wow, they did a tremendous job, particularly the underwater footage. They had just enough light to capture these things, and it was just a joy to watch. So there we have it. Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Your list, as I understand it, is The Mummy, Dracula, The Invisible Man, Frankenstein, Wolfman, and then The Creature from the Black Lagoon.
That is correct.
Gareth Nichols, the new Rank and Review champion.
Oh my God!
I think part of it might be that we watched all the movies together.
Could be.
We both we watched them and we kind of chewed the fat right away as we experienced them, so maybe that helped us align more. I hope Matthew Risling isn't too disappointed by this. It was a short reign, but there it was. I'll go through my list because it is my right, but I think I'm largely going to echo what you're saying. The Mummy was the worst, both on a script level and on an execution level for me, so it was an easy pick for last place.
Yep.
I think they had the least to work with. There was a few comical moments early on when the first guy sees the mummy come to life. I laughed, but I don't think that was the response that they wanted.
They were hoping for something different.
Yes, if I had to say there was one movie to avoid, and I would say watch all of them, but this was easily the bottom of the list.
Yep.
Dracula's number 5, and it's more an important movie than maybe I think a good movie in a lot of ways.
Yes.
It's interesting to see this formative performance of Bela Lugosi. You're right about the huge spaces that they're in, giving the movie sort of this grandeur, but for me it just felt knee deep in mud. It was just moving like molasses. It was just any kind of energy or thrills that could be built up just weren't happening. So it became a little bit more academic for me.
Very true.
Number 4, The Invisible Man. For me, in a lot of ways, it's kind of, considering when it was made, the most impressive light show, special effects extravaganza.
100%.
I can definitely see people, their jaws hitting the floor when they saw it for the first time. But yeah, we lack access to that central character in a way that we can empathize or sympathize. So we just basically witness the movie more than we get involved in it to that regard. But it's interesting. There's a new Invisible Man coming out right away from Lee Winnell, so I'm curious to see where they go with that.
Indeed.
Number 3, Frankenstein. I really liked the creature design, and this was the first time that the climax of the movie, and maybe even the best climaxes of all the movies that we watched, like that huge burning castle, whatever the hell that thing is, it feels like something epic is taking place, and that this is an important, crazy, story that needed to be told, and that this was the best way they could tell it at the time. And the Frankenstein story has been told many, many, many times, but I believe I said the similar thing about the Wolfman. When someone says Frankenstein, what image comes into your head?
This one.
It is still this one.
100%.
And so there we go. if I waffled at all, it was probably on 3 and 2. But number 2, I'm going for the Wolfman. And again, we just talked about it. I found we definitely had access to the character.
Yes.
Whether or not you thought he was an amazing actor or not, he was a warm, likable, sympathetic presence, and he did nothing to deserve what happened to him. So it's easy to empathize and get swept up in the narrative in that way. So I had a good time with the Wolfman, and again, I'm big points from them. Just like we're going to create something out of the ether here, and it here it stays. It's outlived everybody who made it.
Yep.
Well done.
Indeed.
And number 1, The Creature from the Black Lagoon. I'm such a monster movie guy. Like, I love a straight, good creature feature where a cast gets slowly whittled down by an interesting monster. I'm always, like, talking about how much I love Tremors. It's just, like, a basic, silly, dumb monster movie. But you know what? Sign me up for a silly, dumb monster movie. Like, sometimes I don't want something to overthink it. I don't want to be traumatized by a Hereditary on a regular basis, you know? I like a horror movie that can be thrilling and fun.
Yes.
And this movie was thrilling and fun. Creature from the Black Lagoon, number 1, Gareth Nichol, the new Rank and Review champion. Thank you so much for being here. You wear that proudly, Em.
Oh, I intend to, yeah. No.
You can brag to your friends.
Indeed. Yeah, I understood there was a check.
Yes. Is there anything you want to say to the kids on the internet before we wrap this episode up?
Only that they should watch these creature features.
Yeah.
They absolutely should. It's a good history lesson, and more than that, they're a really fun watch from front to back. And yeah, give yourself this little bit of background. So when you're talking about the new releases of these movies that are coming out, then you have something to draw from.
The Mini Fridge Dinner Theatre in Saskatoon. If you like live theatre and you're in the Saskatoon area, support our local actors, please.
Absolutely. Yes, they're doing good work and they deserve to be seen as well.
Correct.
Mm.
That is all.
Thank you.
And there it was, a very quick and dirty episode of Rank and Review that came out with a brand new champion, Mr. G Money. G has been a friend of mine for a very long time, and he helped me bring a dream to fruition by producing Book of Trespasses. And even though we've had a real hard time getting it out into the world, I will never regret making the movie. And it's always great to talk to G, and it's great that he's the new Rank and Review champion. But I just want to publicly thank him again, because what he did for me, I just will never be able to repay. So, big love, G Money, big love, and welcome to your Rank and Review championship reign here. So, I hope you continue listening to Rank and Review. We've got a Marvel episode coming up, and that should be an interesting one, and hopefully soon some more Coen brothers. So keep listening, keep sending that feedback to ranknreview@gmail.com, ranknreview@gmail.com, and I drop every other Wednesday.